Welcome to the closing table. I'm your host, Adam Rubin. Hey, we are diving deep into the world of luxury real estate development with a true titan of the industry. My guest is Steve Kliegerman of Brown Harris Stevens Development Marketing. For decades, Stephen has been at the forefront of shaping the skylines of New York and beyond, overseeing the strategic direction and execution of some of the most iconic and successful residential projects in the country. He brings unparalleled insight into market dynamics, high-stakes strategy, and what it takes to scale a premier brand in a competitive landscape. In this episode, we're going to uncover the key trends driving the market, the strategies behind building a world-class team, and how innovation is redefining the future of development. Get ready for an insightful conversation with a leader who has mastered the art of growth. Steve, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, Adam. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. My pleasure. All right. So why don't you kind of introduce yourself to the audience from your own words, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So I'm Steve Kliegerman. I'm president of Brown Harris Stevens Development Marketing. For those of you who don't know, Brown Harris Stevens is the largest privately held real estate brokerage firm in New York. We also have offices in Southern Connecticut, Northern New Jersey, and South Florida. We're a 152-year-old company, so we're also the oldest, not only the oldest brokerage firm in those areas, but also the only privately held one, which is really important because it makes us a lot more flexible and gives us the opportunity to be more, I believe, be more innovative and more creative without having to answer to shareholders. I got my start in real estate at a young age. My dad was a real estate broker. And so growing up, I kind of grew up with the lingo, at least at the dinner table. My dad was involved in real estate actually in Washington, D.C. and New York City and the Bronx, working with a lot of government programs, FHA programs, helping people who really needed help to buy their first home with all kinds of great programs like, $5,000 down to buy a brand new home. And then you got all kinds of credit. So it was almost like getting a home for no money down. So when I was graduating from college in 1989, for those of you who remember, the economy wasn't so great. We were coming out of the recession of 1987 and the stock market collapse in 1987, and finding a job was not very easy. So I had interest actually in some ways following in my dad's footsteps, but really focused on trying to get involved in affordable housing. But there weren't very many affordable housing programs going on because the city was not in great economic shape. And as I said, we were coming out of a recession. So I took a deep dive into real estate brokerage, purchasing with a partner my father's real estate brokerage business, which had about 14 agents in it, was losing money at the time when we purchased it from him, and kind of thrust myself into the business and turned a money-losing business around from 1989 to 1993 into something that became profitable. And then a couple of years later, in 1998, I was approached by Clark Halstead, who was truly an innovator in the industry. He wanted to expand his business into growing a downtown presence where I had had my offices, and also into expanding their development services. And I had had some experience with developers in the past. So Clark asked me to join his team, and I happily accepted after a bit of a negotiation. I actually had two other firms trying to buy me at the time, but Clark's offer was the most wasn't just the most potentially lucrative. It was the most interesting because it was giving me the opportunity to be an entrepreneur and to continue down the path that I was at, just with a bigger presence behind me.
Awesome. I love to hear that. And, similar to 1989, I was just a small boy at that point. So I don't remember too much about what the real estate industry was looking like then. But with that being said, hearing, what you said about, taking over a underperforming brokerage, to say lightly, and turned it into a profitable one. What did you do? What was the secret sauce? Why did you know how to do it? Tell me a little bit
So
about that.
I had been entrepreneurial as a young adult or a child. A good friend of my sister's was very entrepreneurial, and he had a boat maintenance business, and he hired me to work with him. So we lived on Long Island. We lived on the South Shore of Long Island. We were painting and cleaning and detailing boats. And then he went off to school, and I continued the business. So I realized that I didn't have all the relationships that he had at like boatyards and things. So I made up flyers and I started marketing myself. And I would go to local boatyards and I'd go to local marinas and literally market myself and then my friends to detail and clean and wash and wax boats. I spent a lot of time on my back painting boats literally within inches of my face. And that started to teach me the power of marketing. So when I took over the real estate business, one of the first things we did is we created a marketing program for our agents, postcards, believe it or not. It was, this was the time before the internet was really the place to market. And we came up with a array of different types of postcards, solicitations to obtain listings, thank you notes to the brokers that worked with us and to the people in the building that worked with us to help us sell those apartments. And we started creating more interesting advertising, and it started to really pay off. We saw the business turning around. We were attracting better agents. We did a lot of sales training, which a lot of people weren't doing at the time. Back then, real estate sales was not seen as a serious profession, and we wanted to change that. So we only hired people, well, I shouldn't even say hired because they were independent contractors, but we only held the licenses for people who saw this as a career. They needed to make money to support themselves and or their family, whatever that family makeup might have been. And they weren't just coming to bide time because they had a breadwinner in the house. They needed to earn money to live. So we started doing sales training, and then we started to do the sales training and marketing then morphed into sales analysis. How many phone calls, how many showings, how many leads do you need to have to make a deal, right? To get paid. And we were able, by doing that, we were able to really systemize the the process of planning. So if let's say a broker says, Steve, I want to make $100,000 next year. Well, in the past, brokers would just say, well, I don't know how many deals I'm going to have to make, how many showings I'm going to have to do, how many people I'm going to have to speak to make $100,000. And we were able to really analyze our business to say, well, if you have this funnel of potential business, how many balls do I have to put in the beginning of the funnel to have them start falling out the end? And that's how we created successful salespeople. And that caught the attention of Clark Halstead and a gentleman named Michael Goldenberg, who was our director of sales downtown at the time, who I had known because I was on a board with him. And that that caught their eye. And I was also very active in our industry, trying to get our industry to work more closely together because the real estate industry was very insulary. No one shared listings. There was no Zillow, there was no Trulia, there was no, there was no Street Easy. We literally faxed listings to each other, and there was no rules whether you did that or not. You could send it to one friend, not send it to another. So we created this organization called the Downtown Brokers Association that everyone who was a member of that association agreed to share their listings with each other. And that started to really innovate the industry. And from there we grew. And as I said, then I caught the eye of Clark and Michael, and they called me up one day and they said, we'd love for you to come help us expand our business. And after a negotiation, I was being wooed by a couple of other firms at the time. We came to terms. I had never really managed or worked with more than 14 people at a time. Clark wanted me to come in and manage an office of 30 people and then build a second office that could hold 100. And, he said he had faith in me. And lo and behold, we entered into an agreement. And over the course of the next 3 years, we expanded their downtown footprint from 100 agents to 100.
Wow.
And that was the start of my business. And then at the same time, I was developing a new development arm of the business, working with developers to bring new condominium projects to market. And so we were kind of parallel pathing those. And eventually I had to make a choice. Which side of the business did I want to work in? Did I want to continue down the resale path? Or did I want to focus on the new development path. And although I really loved working with the brokers on resale, I love the business to business aspect of working with developers and creating something out of kind of nothing. So I chose to stay on that path. We brought in a brilliant gentleman named Richard Grossman to run our downtown offices. And I built a team of people, starting with myself and one marketing person. And we started working with developers, talking to small developers and then larger developers. And as we worked with more developers, we started to add on to our team. So we started with a marketing person, and we had a marketing project manager under the marketing officer. Then we added a research person, and now we're 14 people in our back office. We have a chief architecture and design officer on our team. We have 2 people in research. We have 4 marketing project managers, a chief marketing officer, an operations
Wow.
manager. And what we do now is we fill a role that, unless you're the biggest developers in the country, most developers don't have. So we bring um, all the talent and consultants to the table that most developers don't have in-house.
Makes sense. All right. That's a lot to
It's a lot to
digest
distill. It is.
and unpack there, but all very interesting, enlightening, and honestly, quite frankly, from a personal perspective, really great to just hear that story. It adds context. It adds context to where we've been as marketers, as real estate professionals, and just, really the journey it's taken from just 25 years ago. And, so hearing that and hearing how initially it was a lot of boots on the ground, shaking hands, talking to people with all the technology that's available to the consumers these days, it really is amazing that, sometimes that's still, is one of the most powerful ways to, add some unique value, and personalize and customize the approach. So, I always try to position myself somewhere in the middle, almost like a hybrid element. I love talking to people, but I also love to use the technology so that I know I'm talking to the right people. Um,
Absolutely.
you know, so let's go back to this timeline because I'm genuinely very interested in just the evolution of, just having one book. Referrals were frowned upon, and to kind of, the way it is now. So what would you say over, the past 20 years, or let's call it the 3 biggest catalysts or the biggest tools that have helped you be more successful, more efficient, and maybe even got some more time back in your life to do what Steve wants to do?
It's really interesting because technology certainly has been a great catalyst to advance our careers and our business and our industry. But on the other side, what technology has also done is monopolized our time because there's no escape now, right? So when I walked through the door in 1989 and took over the office, and that's a whole long story we can maybe talk about another time. We had a receptionist, we had a message pad, we had an answering machine, which means that after hours, there was no, maybe you had a cell phone that was about the size of your computer. But after hours, other than following up and calling some people, no one was really contacting you unless they had your home phone number. So, so technology made our business much more efficient. When we started getting listings, for instance, we had listing binders. And each binder, we had studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, and lofts. And each listing was a different color. So studios were white, and 1 bedrooms were pink, and 2 bedrooms were green, and 3 bedrooms were blue, and lofts were yellow, I think. Okay. And then we had neighborhood books, Greenwich Village, Chelsea, etc. And that's where the listings lived. So in 1990, I believe it was 2, I got a phone call from a woman named Evelyn who was selling a real estate database program. And she came into my office and she talked to me and she showed me a demo of the program. And by the way, the demo of the program was literally like Unix 1.0. It was really basic. But you can put the listings in, you can search by price and size, and that was a game changer because it cut down your time for helping buyers find something by 10 times. Instead of paging through books, I put in my parameters and the listings would spit out. And the system didn't yet have opportunities for photos, but you could have floor plans in there. So you could see the floor plan of the listing. And that was a huge innovator. And actually, that company, Real Plus, actually became the kind of the standard of all the listing databases that are out there today. Still today, you
Oh,
know,
wow.
30 plus years later, they're still around and it's evolved, but it's still the basic same system. So the computer was definitely, the starting point. Cell phones was the next one. Cell phones was the next one because all of a sudden you could be doing work on the go. So while you're on your way walking to an appointment, you're talking to your next prospect, right? So you can prospect all the time. And then weird things like Craigslist, because people started advertising their apartments for sale on Craigslist. So instead of going through the New York Times all the time, now you're going through, an online portal to find people. But I would say computers would be the number one. The cell phone was number two because it gave you the ability to work almost all the time, no matter where you were. And if I had to put a third, I would say digital photography, not having to print a photo, then try to figure out how am I going to edit that photo. So the ability to edit photography to enhance the visual aspect of a listing. Oh, Adam, I don't know what your experience was like, but I'd say that 9 out of every 10 listings we would walk into back in the 90s, the apartment was unshowable. It was cluttered. The windows hadn't been washed in, years. So as soon as you had digital photos, you were able to edit those photos and make them look more presentable to market to people. So, from a resale perspective, those were great tools. From a new development perspective, renderings was the biggest game changer. The
Gotcha.
ability to digitally a home that hasn't been built yet and sell it off of plans and sell the dream before you had the reality was by far the biggest catalyst for marketing a new development. Because if you didn't have that, then you needed to wait for the building to be completely built, a model unit to be installed and photographed before you could really have anything to market to a potential buyer. So renderings, I would say, in the new development world were the biggest catalyst for change. And that is what created the buzz of buying off plan, where people were literally making money before they closed. They were buying pre-development. They were buying at the initial Schedule A, the initial price. And by the time the project was developed, because we were in a growing economy with new product coming, all of a sudden someone, who had put down their 10% 2 years earlier, by the time they closed, they may have been already up 10 or 20%, sometimes 50%,
Wow.
in value. So that created this boom of new development purchasing, which also then led to more innovation in marketing of new developments. So the renderings went to, one that the static rendering went to, you know, digital motion renderings and being able to show more lifestyle and then insert either real models or digital models of people into the photography. And all of a sudden now you're going from a static lifestyle to an active lifestyle.
Love it, love it, love it. And, it seems like, with technology, I think it's fair to say that both the agency and the brokerages and the agents and also the consumer both benefited from, this technology, the innovation and all that. And especially now, yeah, I mean, you just gave your three right there. Now with the new cell phones and iPhones, it's all in one, all three of them
Exactly.
right in one and in your pocket. So before I even go to the next level of that, just out of curiosity, what was the average days on market for houses before the technology or properties
You,
versus afterwards?
it's hard to say exactly because obviously there were highs and lows in the economy during those times. 1989, 1990, I was dealing with 14, 16% interest rates. So average days on market could have been two, three, 400. when interest rates came down and they hit 8%, 8% was the tipping point of the market really catching on fire. So you had a couple of things happening at the same time. Interest rates were getting to 8% or lower. Digital photography started to become in vogue. Okay. So the marketing started to get better. And I mean, days on market cut in half, if not better. So and that continued, to a point where, other than, weird times like a COVID time or a recessionary time, the average days on market could have literally gone from 200 or 300 days to under 100. Right? And then in the
Wow.
boom times, some units never even hit the market. They were
Okay. Yep.
sold, you know, off Schedule A. You went to go see apartment 2A and you ended up buying apartment 32B instead, and 32B would never even hit the marketplace. So days on market also got a little confusing because there were certain things that never even hit the marketplace. So there are a lot of factors. Also, we were highly back in these early 90s until about 2000. The New York City market was almost wholly a co-op market as well. Remember, 70% of the for sale inventory, actually back then, probably 80% of the for sale inventory was a co-op. Very restrictive. International purchasing was very difficult. You had to be very highly qualified to purchase. And even if you were highly qualified to purchase, you still might not get approved by that
Mm.
co-op board, and you never found out why. So all of a sudden, the 2000s come around and developers start developing ground up condos, and that completely shifted the marketplace because all of a sudden you had a type of inventory that you really didn't have before. And that
Very
that that
interesting.
was another innovation per se. Not that condos were
As a-
innovative, but the fact that people were building ground up new condominiums in New York City was reasonably innovative, and that added new product to the market. It also started to then bring new amenities to the marketplace. It's where we started to see more robust fitness centers in buildings, and more pools in buildings, and more attended lobbies, less, unattended lobbies, more doorman buildings, roof decks that were incredible with great views, and, barbecues and outdoor kitchens and the like. Then from there, it just continued to expand. So the market has seen such incredible shifts, both in the product that's been provided to the marketplace, that cutting the late 80s to even the early 2000s is difficult because things have changed so rapidly and so quickly. And by then, by the way, by the early 2000s, yeah, by 2010, we had co-broking basically on demand as well. So all of a sudden, brokers had access to a lot more listings. The time on market went down because the buyer pool expanded, because all of a sudden the inventory wasn't so private anymore. It wasn't hidden. It became much more transparent.
As somebody that also lived in New York for about 6, 7 years and now living in South Florida, it's amazing the differences between, both cities, states. And I think New York City is almost in its own bucket. It's its own entity, if you will. And I remember vividly, fresh out of college, trying to just rent a little studio. And I remember going up there with my application and a check, and there being like 10 other people there.
Hmm.
And I'm like, please take mine, please take mine. They're like, no,
Right.
it's already taken, even
Yeah.
before I could like be shown the apartment.
Yeah. And you probably found that listing like in the Village Voice next to some, like porn website or something.
Exactly, exactly. Totally different ball game. But that's what makes New York City special. And over the years, it's definitely evolved since I lived there. I went up there right when it was coming out of COVID. It was still, a little, I don't even know the proper word to use for it, but it wasn't beating. The heart wasn't beating the way
Right.
I remembered it. And I'm curious. You're there now. How do you see it present day right now? Just the market in general. Is it still that competitive? Can you get in? Is the pricing, through the roof like you're seeing down here in South Florida? What's it like? What's the current state of affairs?
The marketplace, I would say, is very stable right now.
Okay.
There's limited new development inventory in the condo world because post-COVID, getting financing has not been as easy as pre-COVID. the city went through a lot of legislative changes that affected new development, and recently went through some new legislative changes that have really been beneficial to the rental developers. So, 90% of what's going up right now in the city is still rental, with only about 10% being condo. So we're actually projecting over the next 4 to 5 years, the average number of units typically over the last 10 years delivered to the marketplace is somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000. Over the next 5 years, annually, like, we might be at 1,500, 1,000 units a year. So supply is dwindling as demand either remains stable or is starting to rise. At the high end of the market, 7, 8 million and above, the city is on fire. Great product being delivered, great amenities, tremendous designers and architects. Wealthy people are buying into New York City. So for all who try to say that New York City is on the decline, we elected a mayor that's going to, X, Y, and Z the city. Smart people are investing in New York right now. And big numbers. Over the summer, we saw 3 or 4 of the highest prices ever paid for new development condos on a price per square foot basis and a total dollars basis. I believe the city's actually on an upswing. The Park Avenue corridor from Grand Central to 60th Street, many of those office buildings that were iconic office buildings for 50 years are being torn down to build new iconic office buildings. JP Morgan just invested $5 billion in a new office
Wow.
tower. $5 billion.
Wow.
Right? JP Morgan's not investing $5 billion in New York City if they don't believe that New York City has a bright future. People are coming back to work, which is awesome. Typical companies have people at work at least 4 days a week now. I live in Westchester. Actually, we're doing this podcast from home today because it's just before Thanksgiving. But on my train on a regular basis, I would say a year ago, my train was half full at best at any hour. My train is full every day now, including Friday and Monday, to the point where it's basically standing room only. So the commute into the city has become busier, which is great for New York City. I think New York City actually is seeing the next kind of wave of the growth of New York City. There's more rental units being delivered now than we've seen in decades. But the other side of that is they're coming over a number of years. So rents in New York City continue to grow. So rents are high. It's expensive to live in this city, but the average wage is a lot higher as well, so people can afford that. But what the growth in rent is doing is it's actually pushing people to buy. We see a lot of what I call adult children, people in their mid-20s to mid-30s whose parents are helping them purchase their first home, both because it's a good long-term investment in their eyes, second because rents are so high, and third because it's a good way to transfer wealth, eventually. So the city's doing great. The city's cleaner than it's been in years. We do have a homeless issue, but every large city has that. But I would say it's gotten much better since 2022, where I think it was probably at its worst. And there's new growth in the city. So there's areas of the city like Morningside Heights and Inwood, Upper Manhattan, that are now seeing tremendous growth and new development. The South Bronx is seeing a lot of new rental development, and Brooklyn has become a brand on its own, right? And Brooklyn is an area where, back in the early 2000s to about 2010, 2012, you couldn't get a foreign investor to come to buy an apartment in Brooklyn. Now they start their purchase search in Brooklyn, and then if they can't find something, they come to New York City, to Manhattan, because Brooklyn is still a little less expensive. So I'm very bullish on New York. Very, very bullish.
And it shows. I can hear it loud and clear.
But
You're
but
proud.
but
You're proud of your city.
right, but it's fact based.
Oh,
I'm a very realistic person.
for sure.
Um, you know, the
And you have a
fact
lot of
that
data backed
people,
behind it.
yeah, the fact that people are going back to work, the fact that companies in New York City are hiring, the fact that people are coming back from Florida to come back to work in New York because that's where the business is. Listen, it's Florida's great, the weather's terrific, but every company wants to be in New York because this is where the young talent wants to be. It's also a
For sure.
walkable city. Florida is great, but you need a car to go
Yeah.
anywhere. In New York City, you don't need a car. You've got great public transportation. Now we've got bike lanes as well. You see more and more people riding their bikes in the city every day. So I'm cautiously optimistic about the future of the city. And like I said, you see a lot of investment in this city, which also gives me a lot of confidence that we're going in the right direction.
So then, Steve, given your vantage point, what is the single biggest trend you see shaping the luxury real estate?
Well, the trend that has pushed the luxury market is both bringing in name designers and architects. And on top of that, it's heightened views, right? So the 57th Street corridor, which has now been named Billionaires Row. If you told somebody 15 years ago that the wealthiest people in the world were going to live on 57th Street, they would have told you you're out of your mind. They would have said, no, they're going to live on Madison Avenue. They're going to live on Fifth Avenue. They're going to live on Central Park West. They live on 57th Street. It was not a residential neighborhood. It became a
Wow.
residential neighborhood because developers were able to build super tall towers that have incredible views of Central Park and the entire city. The high end of the market wants a view. They want a great design of their apartment. They want great interiors and they want terrific amenities. And that's all the things that are coming to these buildings now that we saw trends occurring in cities like Toronto in the past, Beverly Hills, know, where you had these great architects coming to build cities that hadn't really been built up yet, like Manhattan. It kind of reminds me, like Toronto reminds me of Chicago after the Great Fire. All these amazing buildings came up in Toronto, and all of my developers who had been up to Toronto said, like, if back in the early 2000s, if you want to see what's really going on in development, go to see what's happening in Toronto. So we did, and we saw a lot of great designers and architects, and a lot of that talent came here. But views drive things, outdoor space drives things. But ultimately, if the floor plan doesn't work, the unit doesn't sell. So one of the great innovations really that has occurred is architects working with people like myself, working with people that understand how people live to design apartments that people want to live in. I remember an architect friend years ago joked that all the apartments he was looking at that were designed by certain architects had no closets. And he joked, yeah, it's because architects are always in the studio. They never change their clothes. They're always working. So they don't need big closets, right? So, literally, I mean, closets changed the value of apartments, walk-in closets, many closets, but views really is what drives value. Views, design, and location. But that's the other thing is that the city has become a lot more homogeneous. There are many more neighborhoods now that can support luxury housing than there were back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, right? The East Village was hip and cool, but it was kind of grungy and dirty. Now it's still kind of hip and cool, but it's not so dirty,
Mm.
right? So now you've got $2,500 a square foot condos being built there. Lower Manhattan was only office. Now it's office and residential. So these new neighborhoods, these new residential neighborhoods evolve, and as they evolve, the architecture and design follows.
Evolve. I keep hearing evolve, and honestly, that I think is New York City in a nutshell. It just continues to evolve, grow, adapt, you name it. And the appeal for the city, will always
Absolutely.
for good reason too.
And then the interesting thing is from that evolution, neighborhoods like Long Island City pop up, right? And all of a sudden you have all these great buildings being built in Long Island City, a little bit less expensive, but still, one subway stop into Midtown Manhattan on the 7 train, very attainable. Downtown Brooklyn started to become very, very in vogue. And now you've got some of the tallest and most amazing buildings in New York being built in downtown Brooklyn, Fort Greene, certainly, Brooklyn Heights and Park Slope and Cobble Hill. So the city the city still has a lot of opportunity to grow and evolve too. Queens really just started to become a destination where Brooklyn branded itself very early on. Queens is now starting to do the same thing, and and neighborhoods that are long established neighborhoods in Queens, like Woodside and Sunnyside, obviously Long Island City, um, Forest Hills, are now seeing more development, which is providing more reasonably priced homes for people who want to live in the city, but don't need to live in the heart of the city. So I think there's great opportunity. I really do. And I'm really excited because the city is also investing in a lot of infrastructure that's going to make it better to live in New York over time. The Second Avenue subway has now been expanded on the east side or being expanded on the east side. We're using the waterways more often for transportation. So, the Javits Center has been completely renovated. And now you have Hudson Yards. A whole new neighborhood has been developed. Who would have ever thought a new neighborhood would be developed in Manhattan?
It's amazing. It truly is amazing. So, on that note of growth and excitement and just like the sophistication of moving parts that's going on, let's talk a little strategy. Do you have a strategy in place to be able to accommodate all of these, changes and evolution with the market expanding the way it is? All this new technology that has become available. Talk to me a little bit about that and what you're doing to make sure that you're prepared and ready to provide, what you do for your clients.
Sure. So I'm really lucky because I work with truly brilliant people. My chief marketing officer, Hunter Frick, is a true innovator in new development marketing. SVP of Business Development, Robin Schneiderman, always has his finger on the pulse of what's coming and what opportunities are arising in development and zoning and the transition of development rights, which is something that we've gotten very involved in lately. Technology has helped a lot with that. We work with some programs that provide us with zoning information so we can see where development rights are available that maybe we can take from one property and transfer to another to help that developer enhance the value of their property, enhance the value of their development site. Let's say from a 50,000 square foot site to an 80,000 square foot site, or from a 12-story building to a 20-story building. And this is all available to us because of the technology that takes public record information and puts it into a usable format. AI is starting to also come into place when it comes to marketing and when it comes to design and development. And Hunter and his team have been bringing tremendous tools to the table to enhance our marketing presentations and to more efficiently and cost effectively create marketing materials, whether those be renderings, animations. Obviously, drone photography is amazing because now you can actually simulate views for an apartment. So all of these innovations they made us more efficient, but they've enabled us to bring value to the table with our clients, where it's not that our market knowledge and our marketing acumen isn't amazing, but if I come to you as a developer, Adam, and say, hey, look, for half the price per square foot that you paid for the ground that you're building that building on, I could add 20,000 square feet to your building. That's real value, right?
And
So
you attribute that to the technology to be able to equip you with that type of real-time
technology
information
has allowed us to identify the opportunities,
opportunities.
and then changes in zoning and legislation in the city have enabled us to implement it. So
Gotcha.
there was just the Midtown South in New York City went through a rezoning so that you could build more bulk on a site, right? So you can go from a 10 or a 12 FAR, sometimes all the way up to an FAR of 18, which is a multiplier of how many square feet your site is, how big you can build that building.
Gotcha.
But you may not have all of the developable rights on your site to build that. Now you can take developable rights not only by properties that touch you, but in certain areas, you can go a few blocks away and still transfer those rights. And technology has enabled us to identify where those rights are available in order to bring them to our client, which is incredible. Because if let's say you had a 50,000 square foot site that you can now make 75,000 square feet. So you're enhancing that site basically by 50%, right? And the developer bought the land for $400 a square foot, but they can buy those extra rights for 200 a foot. Now you're dropping their basis in the property from 400 to 300, let's say. So you're enhancing their profit margin.
The ROI. Yep. It's all.
Exactly. So you're bringing a lot of value to the table.
I
Yeah.
love it. Now, let me ask you this, because a lot of this conversation, makes sense that it was about New York City and the tri-state area. Do you ever explore other regions of the country and maybe apply some of this strategy there that maybe others that are currently in those regions are not exploring, that could maybe give you some additional value or a unique value proposition, if you will, to
We
address those needs
so
elsewhere?
we've started to. I mean, we've first we took those same capabilities to our adjoining marketplaces like New Jersey,
There's
Connecticut. But we are starting to explore other marketplaces, and we're talking to those vendors that we work with to see if they can then take their system and apply it to other marketplaces. The interesting thing is that New York City always gets criticized for its very restrictive but very detailed zoning code. Not every city has that. So it becomes difficult because if you don't have the rules in place, it's hard to implement the rules in a database to get the information. A lot of cities do think everything's like by exception. So in some ways it's easier because if you know the right people, you can get something done, but it's not as portable. So what we're doing is we're trying to identify marketplaces that have more restrictions in them so that we could then work with those restrictions and figure out how to enhance things like we do here in New York. So actually, the areas that have more restrictions are there's more opportunity in
Hmm.
because you can find ways through those restrictions.
I like it. I think that's a great strategy. And
Like
honestly,
like I've never done it, but my understanding is like Dallas, there's no zoning. You could have a skyscraper next door to a single family home.
really,
Yeah.
that's unbelievable.
That's my understanding. So,
Th-
like, but then if you go to, another marketplace, like I have a little bit of experience in Boulder, Colorado. Boulder restricts the number of housing units that you can build every year. They have a very strict review process. San Francisco has something similar. So we could look at markets like Boulder or San Francisco where they have similar restrictions and then try to implement those same systems there.
Got you. Makes totally sense. And what's the old saying? If you can make it in New York, you can make
You
it
can make it
anywhere.
anywhere. And that is
Okay.
definitely true. That is definitely true.
All right. So then why don't we that's a great note to kind of pivot to the finish line here because I don't want to take up too much more of your time. But just for the audience, what kind of advice would you give to somebody that may be watching this that was looking to get into this space? Speak from your perspective, keep it authentic. And what would you say to them? Is it a good industry to get into? Is it exciting? Should they be a little worrisome, a little skeptical, maybe a little bit of everything?
I mean, real estate's a great industry, and new development is to me one of the most exciting aspects of real estate because once you work with a developer and you develop a property, whether it be a residential property, a commercial property, it's there basically forever. So, every time you walk by it, every time you see a photo of it, there's this pride factor of, wow, I helped do that.
Oof.
So, there are a number of ways to get involved in new development. I work with a lot of students. I was a graduate of George Washington University. I work with our real estate program there, and I work with a lot of the students there that are looking to get involved in new development or real estate in general. There's the financial analysis side, there's the brokerage side, there's the marketing side. You have to obviously work towards your strengths and figure out where you add the most value. But my suggestion is just get your foot in the door, whether you're going to be an on-site admin, whether you're going to be the assistant to the assistant, whether you're going to be a junior marketing person, a junior analyst. If you have an architecture or design degree, you can work with an established architect and start to get involved in different aspects of the development process. The great thing about being on any sales and marketing team is you typically get to touch a lot of other things. So let's say you get hired for marketing, but now because you're involved in the marketing of the project, you're in the architectural meetings, you're in the design meetings, you're in the construction meetings. You can pick up so much information. I didn't go to grad school. I graduated with a BA. My grad school was going to work. My grad school was going into my own business, learning how to do the accounting because I couldn't afford an accountant other than to do the taxes at the end of the year, learning how to read financials, learning how to read legal documents because I didn't want to have to pay a lawyer until I needed to pay the lawyer. So getting your foot in the door at any level is the first step. Then you find out where you exceed, where you excel. I was a political science major. I wasn't a marketing major. I was a poli-sci major. But I found out that I really loved architecture and design, and I'm a pretty good salesperson because I tell it like it is. And I love that every building I walk into has something unique and different that sets it apart from another. And that's why I got involved in new development, because I wanted to be part of that process of providing housing and building housing and making things different. So, you can get an entry-level job as an administrative person on site at a sales office. You will learn every aspect of the project from being that person, because you're talking to the salespeople, you're talking to the marketing people, you're talking to the architects and the designers, you're working with the designers that are doing the model apartments. There are multitudes of ways to get involved, and sometimes you never know until you're
You're
there
there.
what the end goal is going to be. When I mentor these students from GW, I tell them all, your first job is probably not going to be your last job, and whatever you did in your first job probably won't end up being what you end up doing as your final career, or your career that you establish yourself within. And I think
Absolutely.
that that's the beauty of real estate, is there are so many different things you can do, and you don't have to have, an MBA to do it, unless you're going to be a civil engineer, right? Unless you're going to be, architect and need to be licensed to do something. But some of the most successful people I've met in real estate never even thought they'd be involved in real estate when they got out of.
And you're looking at one right here as
There
well.
you go.
You can add me to the list. I started off as a TV producer turned marketer turned software tech developer, and then into real estate.
Yeah,
So it happens. Everybody has a journey. There is no do this and you'll get that, result.
that's right.
Learn,
Learn
experience, and get
and
out
talk to
there.
as many people as you can, you know.
Exactly.
And Clark Halstead told me something, and I pass this on to all of our sales teams, all of our marketing people. A greater power gave you two ears and one mouth for a reason. You get into that room and you listen, and you listen, and you listen. And when you have something pertinent to say, that's when you say it.
Thanks, man.
And never be scared to ask questions, ever. Because asking questions is how you get the information you need to become that professional.
We'll end it right there,
I love
Stephen.
it.
Thank you so much for your
This has been
wisdom,
great.
your knowledge, your education, your willingness to come on here and speak with myself and the viewers. I look forward to our next conversation, whenever that may be, but we will discuss that offline. I just wanted to say I appreciate you and everything you're doing and taking care of that great city that is New York City. Take
Thanks
care,
so much,
Stephen.
Adam. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Likewise. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye bye.
One.